Welcome back to Media 7. Now, more than ever, sports people are media figures, set up as role models for an audience not much younger than they are, and sometimes the heroes fall to earth, not infrequently with the assistance of the sponsor's own product. Simon Pound investigates.
Sportsmen, how we love to live through your campaigns, glory in your victories. It is so sweet to build you up, but watch out, because there is only one thing the media loves more, and that's taking you down. The media feast on every scandal that comes its way. Whether it's weeing on a bar, jumping on a car,
I'm sorry for what has happened.
Fighting, drugs.
I'm genuinely sorry.
Pokey machine, proceed, hickory pokery.
It was a silly thing to do.
Drinking.
You know, I've only got myself to blame.
Drinking and disorderly.
It's just a reckless mind exposure, basically.
Topless nudity in a bar. Shooting a seal with a pistol. WTF. Drinking all night.
This is my problem, nobody else's.
Smoking bongs.
He was the gold medal winner of bong hits.
Drinking some more. Hey, there might be a pattern here.
There was drink involved.
The heavily alcohol-sponsored stars seem to be perfecting a new prowess. Their public apologies.
I'm sorry.
Sometimes, though, the stories don't even make it to the media. Like with rugby player convicted of sexual assault, Jake Parangatai. He had name suppression for 2 years. Media weren't even allowed to say he was a pro sportsman. Or the case a few years ago of an All Black assaulting a pregnant female. His name is still suppressed. So, do sportsmen get too hard a go in the media or too easy?
An incident in Queenstown, which was highlighted by the media this morning, has brought a number of personal issues to a head.
But as much as the media loves to feast on the indiscretions, are the players set up for a fall? One other issue stands out: the role booze plays in most of these regrettable acts.
I'm embarrassed that the events of one evening have led to me being in this situation.
Could the problems with the violent, disorderly, excessive culture have anything to do with the sponsor's product?
Simon Pound with that report. Joining us now, author and listener sports columnist Richard Becht, the man who helped pioneer the role of sports manager as celebrity handler, Phil Kingsley-Jones, and sports columnist Richard Bock. Welcome to you all. Richard Becht, if we could start with you. The common thing in that reel we just saw there was the ritual apology. Has this just become a media set piece?
Not really. I think they owe it. I mean, if they get in trouble, and unfortunately it's life reflecting life, because what happens with sports people happens in the community, happens in society. Young people, they're going to get caught out, whether you like it or not. When you're tied up in a sports organisation, and you know, I have the misfortune at times to be tied up with the Warriors, with the Kiwis, and you get incidents.
But
things happen.
Young people who have a bad night out don't, you know, most young people don't have to get up in front of cameras and prostrate themselves in front of you guys, though, do they?
No, but they usually have to apologise to someone, but it's because they're not elevated, they don't have a public persona, they don't have to apologise to their fans, to their support base, to their club. They just have to apologise to mum and dad or wife or girlfriend or friends for making an idiot of themselves.
But because they're in that position, because they're well-known sports people, they do actually have these other people they're accountable to.
Absolutely. I think, you know, they're totally accountable, and I know some of the apologies they may sound hollow, but there's no doubt that those sports people, like you or me, if we're just jack anybody, when we do something and we have a bad night and we have a bad experience, we absolutely haul someone over the coals or absolutely ridicule someone, let alone make an absolute ass of ourselves, we feel the need to talk about it to those closest to us, to apologise. And the sports people, unfortunately, they have to still do that to their families and to their partners, but they also have to do it to the people who matter, stakeholders, you know, sponsors, managers, chief executives, teammates.
So whose benefit is it for? Because I sometimes feel, I mean, Richard, you can answer this as well, Richard Bock. I sometimes think that these apologies are for the benefit of journalists. It gives you something to write about, doesn't it?
I think we're talking about sports people that are trading on public opinion, trading on their public image, being paid for their public image. They're going to schools to talk to schools, they're going to hospitals to talk to hospitals. Part of their contract usually, Russell, is an off-the-field representation for that team as well. So as soon as they mess up in this way, there is some consequences.
Yeah, I believe there's something in my contract about not bringing my employer into disrepute. So it's the same thing as that, you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Daryl Tuffy a couple of years ago was a prime example. No alcohol, didn't really break the law in any way at all. A bit of an escapade with a couple of English backpackers.
And a video camera.
But he did embarrass New Zealand cricket in a big way. They couldn't send him to schools or to after-match functions to talk to people, and he got doctor's pay for that.
Now, Phil, you are in an interesting position with these issues because you were really, if I'm correct, the first sports manager in New Zealand to also be a celebrity manager with Jonah. Were you prepared for what that implied?
Oh, yeah, a little bit. I always tell all my athletes now, it's my saying is the higher up the tree the monkey goes, the more you see his ass. So the bigger the name you are, the bigger the mess, the bigger the scandal you're going to cause. And although the media are very hard to deal with, him, a big angry monster that wants to be fed, especially at the time of Jonah Lomu, we had never seen anything like him in this country whatsoever. You talk about Pine Tree, you talk about Andy Hayden, you talk about Sir Richard, you know, talk about our great sports people. There was nobody that ever hit the media like Jonah Lomu, because it wasn't only the New Zealand media that we had to look after. We had to look after the British media, the Australian media, everywhere that rugby was played, and where rugby wasn't played, this young man made headlines. So 24 hours a day, people wanted to talk to him. So he knew. I was lucky with Jonah. Jonah is a really lovely, decent chap, a really nice person. But like all of us, he has Achilles tendons. We all have things that we have to cover.
Well, he never went on a drunken rampage, though, did he?
No.
He got married.
He couldn't afford it. His manager had all the money. Yeah, you see the controversies over getting married, you know, Rich. Straight after the World Cup in '95, I went over to Wales to coach rugby in Wales, and we was trying to manage him from there, and this thing about the wedding. When we look back on it now, it was a really big story at the time, and he sat there crying because he got married.
This is on the home show, wasn't it?
On the home show.
Live.
I mean, it's shown probably more than anything in New Zealand. He sat there crying for getting married. At the time, it was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? I look back now, it's a joke. He didn't invite his mum and dad. I mean, there's a few people in this world who haven't invited their mum and dad, and there's a few mums and dads haven't gone. You know, he could have done it better. He didn't. But to end up on the Holmes programme, crying to the world, this guy who everybody admired so much, we brought him right down to earth. We humbled him, that he had to apologise for getting married without telling mum and dad.
Richard Beck, how does it change things for you as a reporter of sport that the people you cover now are also celebrities? You're in the celebrity media business as well, aren't you?
Yeah, and it's very interesting because you are absolutely on the inside. When you're on the outside, there are perceptions created, and you are, I think, guessing a lot of things. There's a lot of prodding and trying to get information, but you're not in possession of all the facts or the innuendo or whatever might have gone on. When you're behind the scenes, you're obviously privy to a lot more information, and you're privy to people's weak points, I guess. But the big thing you do, and I'm sure this is what Phil does as a manager, is, to me, there's always one piece of advice: don't be stupid, don't get yourself in trouble, there'd be no damage, there's nothing to worry about. But it's all about, in the end, it's one moment of madness. It's what it becomes. And what they do sometimes will be totally trivial. It'll be trivial beside what some of the other people in the community do. And you can go back to the rights and wrongs of the Tony Veach case, for instance. There'd be some things that have been heinous that have happened to people that we've practically not heard about. But you've got a case like his. It's because he has that public adulation factor going on among some people. He's certainly on a pedestal. He is looked at, he is scrutinised more heavily than most people, and that's a consequence of that profile. It happens with sports people too. There's a lot of them have had to apologise, I think, for some pretty minor beer, so to speak.
Well, I mean, Richard Bock, you wrote the Stephen Fleming biography very early on in his career. He was outed as one of 3 players in the New Zealand cricket team smoked marijuana at a party on tour in South Africa. It seemed pretty harsh what happened to him after that. Do you think those players were unfairly scapegoated?
Yeah, I do, but I think, well, I'm not sure about scapegoated, but I'm pretty sure that they weren't the only ones. If you know, there's a lot of chatter since that incident, and from all accounts, it sounds like at least half the team were involved. But it was more.
Why didn't you report that then?
I wasn't there. I can put up my hand
okay,
and I can say, Russell. But you bring up an interesting issue, because if the media do go out to pubs and nightclubs with the team, for instance, like happened with the New Zealand cricket team with Tiger in Durban and a few years ago, there was a brawl there. One of the NZPA reporters was there drinking with them, and the next thing his editor was on the phone saying, "Tell me everything you know." Well, he unfortunately knew a lot of things, and he had to come clean on it, and the players were pretty dirty on him afterwards.
But with you guys will complain about... Oh, sorry, carry on.
Sorry, yeah, well, with Fleming, it was an error of process. They were judged once on tour, fined, and then they came back to New Zealand, and New Zealand Cricket reopened the investigation and suspended them all again, which I think was over the top.
You guys will complain about people like Phil keeping you away from the players that they're looking after, but surely if you're going to dish on them, then they've got every right to do that, haven't they?
Oh yeah, I don't think there's anything more silly than a reporter that thinks that they're going to rubbish a player and then turn up the next morning and that player's going to talk to them freely. I mean, that's just not going to happen, and that's one reason why I quite like my job of just sitting on top of a pedestal, raining judgment down on everyone and not needing to talk to them.
The columnist.
I mean, you don't want to turn up the next day and say, you know, would you please talk to me? I mean,
and the funny thing is that a lot of the journalists are really timid about it too. They're very strong behind the typewriter or the keyboard or whatever, very powerful in saying what they want to say and come up with an angle, and they're terrified turning up the next day. It's exactly what Richard says.
That shouldn't happen.
No.
I mean, you should have your columnists, you should have your reporters, they've all got deemed responsibilities, and you don't overlap.
I also think as well, Russell, that today, because of the media, of all sorts of media, especially with rugby now or any sport being covered, we've all watched it. So it's very hard for the guy like the old Don Camerons and the old Lindsay Knight used to do about the ball went over the touchline, they took a quick throw. We've all seen that, and I believe that these young reporters today are looking to come from different angles. Richard writes a great column every Sunday. Whether you agree with it or not, he is looking at different angles for a different story. Some of these young guys, the easiest way they can get a story, Rich, is, as you know, is to follow around a couple of the famous sports people and wait for them to...
And that's what's happened. There's no longer really very much in the way of true sports writing. You can call it sports reporting, but it's pursuit of angles, and what comes out of this is an awful lack of knowledge about certain sports from reporters, because they don't know the nuances of the sport, or they don't seem to, because they don't talk about the sport analytically. I still think there's a great place for the journo who can write about his chosen sport or sports in an analytical and entertaining way, and I'd often fall back to, say, Roy Masters in the Sydney Morning Herald, who writes a fantastic piece that really looks at the ins and outs of rugby league. He's talking to lots of people. It's not necessarily going for an angle. They're just wonderful. There's a wonderful insight into the game of rugby league and how certain aspects of it are evolving or are not evolving. And to me, that's the way to go about covering sport. Well, I think you can still be analytical, because Phil says, yeah, they all see it. People form their own opinions. But I still come from the school that they would like to hear what you or me or some other journalist thinks about what happened and what went right and what was wrong.
Well, that's right. The Sunday Star Times editor has always told me, Richard, he said, I'm not paying you $750 a year just to hear you tell some...
You need a good manager, Richard. I can have a chat with you after the show.
To give me someone else's opinion. I want your opinion.
Well, you fairly strongly stated your opinion in a column that ruffled a lot of feathers, talking about Sir Brian Lahore's yearning for the good old days, and you really placed that unfortunate booze culture a lot further back than we like to think of it. And people were quite upset by that column, weren't they?
Yeah, it got a huge reaction. I thought I was perfectly entitled to write about that, because he was presenting himself as a former All Black, a former sportsman who felt the country was running off the rails in terms of getting too PC, and I thought that just opened it up for sports reporters, and I couldn't understand that I was the only one that commented on it, really. But in terms of the alcohol and the booze industry, I still think it's just outrageous that we keep talking about the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff and what we're going to do to all these people and how we're going to punish these athletes after they go off the rails, when on the other hand all the sporting corporations and teams are taking as much money as they can from the liquor industry and farming the name all around the place. They're basically using sport as a Trojan horse to get around the liquor advertising rules.
Well, and you look at someone like Ali Williams, who was in a position in Auckland where he could basically go out every night of the week and not have to pay for a drink, and surprise, surprise, he went off the rails a little bit. And I wonder, you know, there seems to be a danger of this happening. You saw it with Richard Kahui. All of a sudden he's in the gossip pages. He's played one game for the All Blacks.
But what it comes back to still is the professional attitude of the organisation they're involved in, and the professionalism of the players. Now, I'm not saying that the people I'm involved with, and say at the Warriors, don't go off and have a beer. But what I do know is they've got a really professional and rigid attitude foisted on them by their trainers and coaching staff, that we do this on this night, we don't do that night, or that night or that night, because we've got a short turnaround, we play again in 5 nights, no drinking tonight. And might be a couple of quiet beers in the team room. It's bound to be a couple of blokes who sneak off and do a bit more, but by and large, people buy into that. In a truly professional organisation, I've seen it happen, and it does happen. That they know they can't go off and drink 3 or 4 nights a week. It will happen in other sports and in other countries. I mean, in Britain and their UK league scene, there's a terrible culture for drinking 2, 3, 4 nights a week.
Yeah.
But that's a cultural thing.
I feel sorry as well for the players today for when we talk about Sir Brian's Day. I mean, when I came to New Zealand 26 years ago, you had a beer after training on a Tuesday, you had a beer after training on a Thursday. You didn't have many because you had to go to work tomorrow morning, and you had a beer with all your mates on a Saturday night. There was no viaduct, there was no Ponsonby Road. You stayed in the rugby club with all your mates who would pull your head in if you got out of hand. You know?
And the kids in the back of the car? In the car?
I used to love having the kids in the back of the car. Mine had grown up. I was married at 16, so they used to come in and drink with me, so that was fine. It was, you know, it's a different scenario today, Richard. There is too much temptation. And these boys are not like the old guys who used to have a couple of beers every night and they were used to a couple of beers. These boys, as Richard said, rightly so, they don't drink. Then all of a sudden, they are let loose one night. They hit all these magical places. People buy them the drinks. The people that want to take a pop at them later on.
Someone like Jesse Ryder seems to be a real case of that. He's placed under this additional pressure because he's risen to the top of the sport.
But he also likes a drink, and people take advantage of that and know that with Jesse. So,
and he's got an issue. He's got an issue with it. You know, some people can handle it, some people can't. That's typical. We all know that.
I think if you groom enough young men in an environment that normalises binge drinking, it's only a matter of the math. It's nothing to do with discipline, ethics, anything like that. Jesse's just one of the unlucky ones.
But the other thing that happens, and this is where organisations need to be careful too, is that try to get it organised that you drink in someone's place. You don't go public. You don't get yourself in front of people who are going to antagonise you, because that does happen too.
Just don't drive home.
All they want to do is antagonise you. They want to make a name for themselves and say, hey, I riled up someone and he took a swipe at me, or he came back at me with this. They're bent on some sort of destruction, a lot of people, and you put yourself in a position, you're out there in front of them, it's going to happen.
And the players themselves have got to take responsibility, because their dads, we say their parents and their team manager, their coach, you can't watch them 24 hours. You know, Eric Rush never drunk. He doesn't like beer. He doesn't drink. Jonah never drank. So they boys are not going to be a problem. They'll be the ones that's there trying to stop the foray. But they can get in trouble just even being there. But these guys, there's a lot of them now, they think they're superstars. You know, they go downtown, they swan in the place. It gives other people bad impressions how they are. They think they own the show. So it's heading, as you said, for disaster.
On the other hand, it's quite good, I think, that it is seen in the media that these people are no different than anyone else. And if they go off the rails, they're just like the rest of us. And it's good that we're not glorifying sport to the extent that we think that everyone that plays it are saints.
That's what I like about it. We were told, that sort of phrase role model would be over this term role model, and I hate that in sport. I really do. I agree with it. I've heard other people talk about it. To me, they have to try to set a good example. Sure, that should be the endeavour, because they are in an elevated and in a privileged position where people see them, enjoy seeing them perform and all that. They do have some responsibility to perform and behave to a certain standard, but they are not role models in the way of the reverend down at the church, or a
See,
court
this is-
judge or that sort of thing.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that. These boys are made role models by the younger kids. And they'd rather have Eric Rush calling in to see them when they're sick in Starship Hospital than the vicar down the road or John Key or John Banks. You know, they can't. So wouldn't we all? I mean, so these kids, these sportsmen, whether they like it or not, Rich, are made role models. They cut their hair like the guy. They bowl the ball like the guy. You know, they are the role models. Whether we should say, look, really, they're only ordinary guys who are very good at what they do.
Well, role model
It shouldn't be positively loaded.
No,
yeah,
exactly.
They are role models whether they like it or not.
Or not, they got no option.
Well, I think it's going to be a continued challenge for these young guys because they're not going to disappear out of the media. Unfortunately, we do have to stop now, but you all seem so reasonable. Anyway, that is our show this week. Thank you to Phil Kingsley-Jones, Richard Becht and Richard Bock, and to our legal panellists, Warren Young, Val Sim and Bevan Rapson. And thanks to you for watching. We'll be back with Media 7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye.